What is rehab or rehabilitation? My name is Fred Begaris, a board certified sports and spine medicine physician in Virginia Beach, Virginia. After 10 years of practice, I still find musculoskeletal medicine both fascinating and challenging. This podcast is about the lingering thoughts and questions I've had after residency and fellowship. My hope is to spark discussion, challenge dogma, and share my experiences in musculoskeletal medicine. Welcome to the Talking Rehab Podcast. I had a patient this week injure their knee with some underlying arthritis and a degenerative meniscus tear. Their main sport was pickleball, so that was their what they wanted to get back into. And I had kind of an interesting discussion with them, so I thought I would kind of talk about it and essentially outline a potential rehabilitation program. Or plus, I wanted to share my thoughts as a sports medicine physician as a very, very amateur pickleball player. So I didn't grow up playing tennis. I played a lot of ping pong, pretty decent, nothing crazy. But it was something that I did every summer in the basement, and I played a lot with my dad. It was fun. I tried playing tennis when I was younger, and for whatever reason, it just didn't really stick. That being said, I did put in a lot of hours playing ping pong and paddle sports. I always felt fairly comfortable. Even now, when I was playing with my son, I don't play ping pong a lot, but I still felt really very comfortable. I guess ultimately, the reps they just stick after a while. And then I had a friend ask if I wanted to play pickleball. And of course, I hear about pickleball all the time as it is one of the fastest growing sports. Everyone around me seems to be, talking about pickleball, pickleball, pickleball. And there was an opportunity to play. And so I just went out. I've played maybe 5 or 6 times, give or take. Not a ton, but enough that I did have some interesting takeaways from it. Overall, as soon as I got onto the court, I felt fairly comfortable. It felt very familiar in terms of like ping pong play, but obviously the court is it did bring up some interesting ideas that I had and some rehab specific issues that come up with playing racket sports and maybe some specific to pickleball. So pickleball, what really jumped out to me is that it's a super fun sport. It seems like everybody can play. You don't have to be very fast. You don't have to be able to hit very hard. Every ball is playable, which I think is an interesting feature of this particular sport. I say that because I do remember when I tried to play tennis, it seemed actually a lot more physical. I had to use a lot more strength and speed and power, and I just didn't really have to do that playing pickleball as much. With pickleball, it seemed like you could be in the right position or in a position to play the ball with less steps. With tennis, I think you just generally have to identify the right position on the court where you have to be, and it often required you to take a lot of steps really quickly. And again, obviously, that's a harder game to play the older as we get, and the older our knees start to wear. Because the court is relatively smaller, it does engage you to play more because the shots seem attainable. When I remember playing tennis or trying to play tennis, right, I was never really very good. There were just certain shots that they were too hard to reach, so I just didn't really go after it. There's just certain shots that you just know you're not going to be able to make a aggressive or an efficient play for it, so you just kind of let it go. Pickleball seems to be a little bit different. Again, everything is playable, so you can actually make it. You don't have to be very fast because the ball is fast, but it also is sometimes really very slow. So again, that unpredictable nature, I think, triggers people to actually to play. If someone is swinging a tennis racket really hard, and they hit it really hard, the chances are that the ball is going to be as fast as it looks or as it sounds. Pickleball, I think, is a little bit different. It can be hit really hard and drop, and it can be hit really hard and just stop in the air. And again, that's the fun part, is because there's some unpredictability to the ball, and it doesn't make you really necessarily give up, if you will. Like, as I said, I was playing a little bit even today, and even the shots that I had the hardest time making, I still really went for it. I mean, some really unusual shots that, given a bigger court, I would not necessarily do it. The size of the racket, I think, also is a factor. Um, with a longer racket, it's harder to control. So even those shots that are really far away from you, even if you can touch it, you just know that you're not going to be able to control it. You're not going to be able to hit it with consistent power when you play with a tennis racket. Now, with a pickleball, again, the court is relatively smaller. The arms are obviously the same length, but the paddles, I would say, the appropriate length for the court. So I think that it is to the advantage of the player, that everything essentially can be hit. The nature of these pickleball paddles also is to the advantage of gameplay. Again, I have limited experience, but just observing, it seems like a lot of the pickleball paddles, there's different lengths, there's different widths. They make the gameplay easier, in my opinion. Right now, I have kind of the beginner Amazon paddles, and I play fine. And then I would hit around with some of the more expensive models, and I can see why the paddle can make a difference and how it encourages play. The weight of the paddle is also relatively light. Again, it's to the advantage of people when they have injuries. I guess it's kind of a pro and a con. Um, it's a pro because the racket itself, or the paddle itself, is pretty light. Therefore, when you actually swing it, there's not as much momentum that you have to fight against. Also, the ball itself, the recoil that the ball gives towards the racket, I think also helps people who have shoulder injuries. Sometimes that little bit of recoil can tweak the shoulder when you hit a tennis ball with a tennis racket. That little bit of recoil, that tension on the strings, I think sometimes gives you a little bit of pushback, and that can sometimes put extra stress on the small muscle fibers of the shoulder, which definitely are a factor when it comes to impingement in racket-based sports. And in terms of this particular patient, they did not have a shoulder problem. It was really mainly the knee. And I asked them, do they have any other forms of exercise? Anything that they really like to do, going to the gym, going for walks, running, things like that. And their short answer was basically no. That's really kind of like all that they like to do. Paddle sports. They had mentioned they enjoyed doing ping pong. And when it comes to knee injuries, the multi-directional sports are probably the more complicated movements that are out there. Therefore, they are also the most challenging, and usually the last sport that is introduced into both rehabilitation and also recreational play slash exercise. So I had to think about a way this person can get their paddle play, either with ping pong or with a pickleball paddle. And essentially, what I had recommended was trying to play ping pong first, and then start to transition into pickleball play. The reason why I chose ping pong is that, from my experience, the ping pong reactions, the swings, the slices, even the ball placement seems to be fairly applicable to pickleball. And because the ping pong table is relatively short, and your ability to cover distance with just twisting your torso is pretty good. I thought that that might be a good way to keep the person's knees planted in one particular direction. Even if they had to cover distance, the distance that they're covering is really with a lateral shuffle versus having to sprint forward and cut. That is a more complicated movement, and certainly I think that would be maybe hard to do, and maybe painful at the very beginning. So basically I said, if you can, what you can practice doing is just doing maybe 80% ping pong and 20% pickleball. And that way you'll kind of get your paddle fix. You get the fun part, and you still have the opportunity to maintain your part of your skills, the hand-eye coordination, also the ball placement, and you can almost really just still practice a lot of the strokes as well. I found, at least the way that I play, I find that they seem to be fairly similar. As you start to gain confidence in the lateral direction with that 80% of play, then you can start to save that 20% for trying to move forward, backwards, and side to side, not necessarily twisting, but then that would be kind of the goal in the pickleball play of things. You would almost have to limit yourself to maybe starting off playing more net than playing back, because it forces you to play a shorter game, and it's more reactionary, and you don't have to cover as much space. And then as you start to become more confident, the ratio of how much you're playing pickleball will start to increase. So you'll start off at 80% ping pong. Now you're back to 50% ping pong, 50% pickleball. And I found that that is a nice, logical, and a predictable way to reintroduce pickleball play. Again, it's not going to be the upper extremity swinging part of things that's going to be the limiting factor. It's really trying to introduce running and foot placement with confidence before actually twisting. One of the things that they had mentioned was that they don't have the confidence in their knees just yet. And I think trying this ping pong slash pickleball program might be a good way where you start to kind of build up that confidence, because again, with the ping pong play, you're not doing a lot of cutting, you're not doing a lot of twisting, but you are moving side to side. This, when you start to add in forward and backward play, you now have to stop, you have to be able to take off, stop, and then also reverse in the opposite direction. That is also a skill that has to be retrained. And twisting part is not necessarily going to be a skill that's trained. When I've injured my knee, it's usually a confidence thing. If you're able to shuffle from side to side and you can change directions, that is going to challenge your knee in probably the safest way before you actually attempt to twist. When you start to feel more comfortable running back and forth, stopping and starting in forward and backwards, side to side, I think that most people at that point are going to be feeling pretty comfortable about doing multi-directional play. And at that point, it's no longer a ratio game. It's really the person is now not even thinking about it. They're comfortable. If you think about it in terms of, forward, backward, side to side, twist to the right, twist to the left, person has now practiced 4 out of those 6 particular movements. And I find that people, once they get over majority of the movements with confidence, they start to twist. They tend to do the more complicated footwork without even thinking about it anymore. And that, I think, is because they have now spent more time on the court and they're feeling a lot more comfortable. When I've seen people return to the court too soon, they try and make plays that they're not ready for just yet. Like visually, they're trying to make the play, but they haven't figured out the footwork with an injured knee just yet. Side to side and forward and backward, I think, are very scalable movements for even for someone who has an acutely injured knee. The problem is like when the ball goes to the side and they try and lunge after it. I think if you're using a ping pong table, they can focus on the lateral movement without twisting too much. So anyhow, I just to share. I wanted to share my sports medicine opinion as a amateur pickleballer. Definitely a fun sport. I can definitely see why it is the fastest growing sport in the country, but I can also see why people end up getting injured. It's not necessarily from that it's a dangerous sport. I think it's probably an overuse, not overuse, but it's just you end up going from not playing any sport to just essentially getting addicted to a really fast paced sport, and then you get tendon injuries, foot injuries, ankle sprains, things like that. But you know what? That's okay. If the exercise isn't fun, you're not going to do it. So I would rather have it be fun and we figure out a way to keep you healthy and on the court. Anyhow, I just wanted to share this talk with you. Have a good one. Thank you for listening to the Talking Rehab Podcast. I hope that this podcast stimulates you to question your own practice and how you approach rehabilitation. I truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed listening, make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. I wish you a movement filled day. Take care.